Hey everyone, the time has finally come where I do a video on the Unifi Dream Machine Special Edition. I want to thank Ubiquiti for sending this to me to do a video on. So I reached out to the community asking them how they would like me to do this video. Do they want to just see a migration or do they want to see a full configuration? And 73% out of almost 300 votes wants a full new config. So that's what we're going to do. If you're new here, please hit the subscribe button. Make sure to hit the bell icon. If you'd like to hire me for network consulting, visit www.mactelecomnetworks.com. So first, as always, let's see what comes in the box with the UDM SE, and then we'll go over my network topology and what we're going to configure. And here we have the UDM SE. On the right-hand side, we have the 1.3-inch touchscreen, and it says below it, UDM SE with a little lightning symbol. In the middle, we have our drive bay, which we could put a drive in for Unifi Protect. And then one of the new features of the UDM SE is the 8 PoE ports. So the first 2 ports are PoE Plus, and the last 6 ports are just standard PoE. The switch within the UDM SE still has a 1 gigabit backplane. Another new feature with the UDM SE is port 9, which is the WAN port, has a 2.5 gigabit per second interface. And this is one of the big selling features. If you have more than a gigabit throughput from your ISP, you could utilize that now. And we also have the secondary SFP WAN port, which does 10 gigabit per second. And then we have another SFP that would be going down to our switch, which also does 10 gigabit per second. And we have a reset button on the end. On the back, we have our USP Connect, which would connect to our RPS system, which I have, and I'll be connecting this to. And then we have our power input, which comes with this locking tab. And this is new with the UDM SE. We didn't have this in the UDM Pro, and I'll show you that once we get everything else out of the box. The only other thing that I didn't show that's new about the UDM SE is the internal 128 SSD. In a separate small box, we get the quick start guide for the Dream Machine SE. And then it comes with this new braided power cable, which has this locking mechanism on the side. You could see that in groove right there, and I'll show you it locking within the SE. It comes with our hardware kit, which Ubiquiti always does a great job on packaging. And then we get our 2 rack ears, and that's all that comes with the SE. Now I'll show you the locking mechanism for our power supply. So now let's put our power cord into the UDM SE. Right now it's just in there. We could easily pull this right back out. So now let's put the locking tab on. We push the locking tab to the side, and this will lock the power cord in. So we won't be able to get that out and by accident knock the power out of our UDM SE. And I really hope they start putting this on more of their devices. Now let's go back to the computer. So that's the new UDM SE, and it looks exactly the same as the UDM Pro with a couple new features in it. The UDM SE comes in at $499 USD MSRP. And currently, as of March 2022, it's only available in the USA and the EU. Now, since we're doing a full build, this video is going to be a little bit longer. So if you want to skip parts, I did put timestamps down below. Let's take a look at my topology. For my network, let's start at the basement. In the basement, this is where I have my rack. I have the UNVR Pro, I have the RPS system, I have an aggregation Pro switch, I have an Enterprise 24 PoE, I have the UDM Pro, and then I have a U6LR just sitting on top of my rack as my basement is unfinished. On the main floor, we could see I have an in-wall HD, and that's cabled back to my main rack. And in my backyard, I have a G4 bullet and an AI 360 camera, and this is being fed by a USW Flex switch in a USW Flex utility box. And that Flex switch is cabled back to my basement. On my second floor, which I am right now, we have a Unifi 6 Pro, and then we have a Unifi 6 Lite, as well as a Switch Lite 16 PoE, and that's sitting in this office just for testing when I'm deploying VoIP systems or other networks. And then in the front of my house or surrounding my house, I have 2 G3 Flexes, a G4 Dome, a G4 Pro, and a G4 Bullet. And we also have a USW Flex that's in my garage that's powering not all of these cameras, but most of them. Now let's take a look at the networks and the Wi-Fi networks that I currently have on my UDM Pro, and we're going to have to recreate those in the UDM SE. So we have our default network, which is 192.168.10.1, and these are all going to be /24s. We have an IoT network on 192.168.20.1 VLAN 20. We have our camera network on 192.168.30.1 on VLAN 30. And then we have our guest network on 192.168.40.1 VLAN 40. So I also used Unifi access, so we created a separate subnet for that on 192.168.50.1 VLAN 50. We have a virtual machine network, which I have a Protectly device that I use XCP&G on, and that is on 192.168.60.1 on VLAN 60. And my last network is for VoIP, and that's on 192.168.70.1 VLAN 70. We have 4 different Wi-Fi SSIDs. The first one is called Dolores, and that's my IoT network. The second one is Mac Telecom Camera, which is my camera network. And then we have the Queen's House, which is our guest network. We also have Mac Telecom, which is on the default network, and only my phone and computer will be allowed to go on that. Now what we need to do, I need to bring the UDM SE downstairs, put it in the rack, and then get everything cabled together. So I'll bring the camera with me and show you that process. So now we're downstairs at my network rack, and there's a few things we need to do. I have my UDM Pro right here, and we need to replace that with my SE. I'll most likely leave the UDM Pro where it is, just for testing purposes and doing some labs. I'm going to put the SE below it, and that will be in between the UDM Pro and the aggregation switch. We also need to do some cable management here. As I've been doing a lot of testing, I kind of just let the cables go wherever they want. So we'll end up tidying this up as well. So let's get to racking the UDM SE. So I decided to take the UDM Pro completely out for now. I will be re-racking it as I'll be using it as a lab device. But we could see here that we have my new UDM SE. In between the UDM SE and the aggregation switch, I'm going to put a brush panel between so that we could cable manage it better instead of going through these keystone ports for some of my devices lower down. So I have the brush panel in place, and we're going to be using the new Rackstud Duos to mount this. I'll put a link down below for these if you want to use them. They're pretty easy to use rather than the cage nuts. So all we need to do for the Rackstud Duos is put this into the slots and then pinch to get it in place. So let's do that on this side. So I'll just put the screw holes through, and then we'll pinch, and we can see that that's now in place. And we have to do that on the other side. Same thing, we'll put it through the holes, and then we'll just pinch. And now it's in place, and we could put our new brush panel in. And now each side comes with this little screwing cap to hold it in place. Okay, I have my UDM SE installed, and we could see it saying plug cable in. This cable right here is my main ISP cable, and I'm just going to plug it into port 9 of the UDM SE. I do have a secondary ISP, so I'm going to pop out this tab on the second WAN port. And then I'm going to put in a copper SFP. My secondary WAN is on port 23, so I'll patch it in. And now we got to get all these switches hooked up to my UDM SE. So the switch that I'm going to hook up to it is the Aggregation Pro switch. I have a couple DAC cables right here, which is direct attached copper, and these will give you a bit lower latency. You could do fiber if you'd like as well. So I'm going to bring the one up. I'm going to pop out the bottom tab for my LAN port, the 10 gigabit LAN port, and then I'm going to plug in the DAC cable. I have this other DAC cable which is going to my aggregation switch, and we need this to plug into my enterprise switch, so I'll do the same thing. Now we can see that we have activity lights on both. Okay, and everything is now cabled together, and that's as good as the cable management is going to be for right now. I am going to get some more SFPs to put into my aggregation switch so that all of my switches are connected to it. We don't want to daisy chain switches, and this aggregation switch eventually will act as a distribution switch. Now let's go back to the computer and get this configured. All right, now we're back at my computer, and I launched a Chrome tab, and it brought me directly to Unifi/setup/troubleshooting. You could also find your IP address of the UDM Pro by going to a command line. On the command line, we could type in ipconfig. Here we could see that I got an IP address of 192.168.1.87, and our gateway is 192.168.1.1, which is our UDM SE. I'm going to set it up using this, and the reason it says no internet detected is because my ISP uses PPPoE. I don't use DHCP or a static address for my main WAN. Most people will be using DHCP, so the internet should just automatically come up. So for me, I'm going to have to go to Advanced Internet Options, and then I'm going to have to select my connection type. By default, it's DHCP. We're going to set it to PPPoE. My interface is my WAN, but if you want to use your SFP port, you could specify that for WAN 2. Now I need to put a username in, a password in, and then a data VLAN for my internet connection, which is Bell, and the VLAN is 35. So I'll put in VLAN tag 35, and then I'll put in the username and password and the DNS information and press next. Now it's saying connecting to the internet, so we'll just wait to see if it gets those credentials right, and we should start a speed test. Awesome, it says internet connected. Your Unifi Dream Machine SE is connected to the internet. Let's press next. Now we have some text saying UI is committed to protecting your privacy and security. We'll press setup UDM SE. Okay, there are 8 steps to set this up. The first one is to name your console. By default, it goes to UDM SE. I'm going to call it Mac Telecom. And then we'll just do SE. I'm going to agree to the end user license, and then we'll press next. Second step is to specify if it's for personal use or for business. Mine's kind of a mixture of both, as this is my home office business, so I'll select business. And then it will ask us what type of business. We're going to just say financial or consulting services, and then the business will be a small business, and we'll press next. On step 3, we need to sign into our UI account. This is our single sign-on. If this UDM SE was at the latest firmware, we would be able to set this up offline, but it isn't. So I'm going to sign on with my single sign-on and then press next. Step 4 is for an update schedule. I'm going to turn this off completely, but if you're just using this for home use, you may want to leave it on. I'll press next. Step 5 is for auto optimize our network. I'm going to turn that off as I'm going to select channels for my APs, and then we'll press next. And this step is going to start a speed test. And we could see that I'm almost getting 900 megabits per second, which my internet is 1 gig down and 1 gig up. And now we're on step 6. It says adjust your speeds to what your ISP has promised you. And they promised me a gig by a gig, so we'll put that in. So 1000 by 1000. And that's pretty close, so we'll press next. And this final step is just to review our information. So it's going to tell us the owner or the super admin of the UDM SE. It's going to say if remote access is enabled, our Ubiquiti account, the console name, the location, time zone, and then automatic updates, which I have disabled, and we'll press finish. Now the UDM SE is set up and we are on the dashboard, and it looks a little bit older because it's not up to the latest firmware. So we need to make sure it is. So we'll go to system settings. Under general in the system settings, we could see a few things. We could see our CPU load, our CPU temperature, and our memory. We could also see the hardware, so the processor and the memory, and then the storage and capacity, which we have our internal storage, and then we have our disk storage, which I don't have any disks mounted into the UDM SE. Now let's click over on the updates. Under updates, we could see our status, and we need to update to 2.3.15. I'm going to click that, and then it's going to upgrade from 2.2.12 to 2.3.15, and we'll press confirm. The UDM SE is now up to date, and we could see that this dashboard looks a little different. We could see our topology and a few things that are plugged in. All the devices aren't showing up yet because they aren't adopted into the controller. A couple things we could see right off the dashboard is release notes. So this will tell us the release notes of the latest stable firmware version. We could submit a support ticket directly to Ubiquiti. We could manage updates, and then we could see our utilization. And then we also have these 2 applications. So we have our network and our protect. We don't have any of the other applications started yet, so they won't show up until we do. We also have users if you want any other users to be able to manage this system or to be able to view your Unifi Protect. Under the settings of the UDM SE, we also have notification, and the default setting is for only critical messages. So this is update available or completion. We could also turn the notifications off, or we could do a custom notification. So if there's updates available, update status, Unifi application updates, console backup, or user management actions. And we could either have this push out to our phone, or we could have them email us. Now looking back at our update section, we could see that the UDM SE is up to date, but our network application isn't. We could see under status that there's an update available, and we're currently sitting on 6.55.5. We're now at the 7.0.23. So I'm going to update the Unifi network controller. And this should push us to 7.0.23. And I'm also going to update the Protect controller. So under Advanced, this is where we could change our console name, and we could turn on SSH if we need to SSH into the UDM SE. We have remote access where we could turn on and off. If you want to view your Protect cameras from your phone, you need to have remote access on. We could also enable analytics and improvements, and we could transfer ownership. So if we want to transfer this new UDM to somebody else's account, we could do that. Under console controls, we have restart, power off, factory reset, download support file, and then restore the console. And this would restore it from a backup. And then we have backup configurations. So I have backup console turned on, and the next one is backup now. So this backs up to your Unifi account. So account.ui.com. And I'll show you this in a little bit when we go over two-factor authentication. But we could also set up the backup scheduler and then download a backup file directly to our computer. The update of the Unifi network controller is now at 7.0.2. The next thing we need to do is adopt all of our devices into the network controller. So I'll click on the access point symbol, and this is the main dashboard for our UDM SE. It's going to give us some traffic overview. It will give us client device types. It will also show us our Wi-Fi clients and most active clients, which we don't have anything really connected to this yet, as nothing's adopted. Before I adopt the devices though, I need to switch our main network. Currently the main network is just default at 192.168.1.1. We want to push that as our diagram to 192.168.10.1. So I'm going to go to the settings wheel, and then I'm going to click on networks. We can see that default is set to 192.168.1.0/24. I'm going to click on that network. I'm going to turn auto scale network off, and then I'm going to switch the host address to be 192.168.10.1. And what we could see that the gateway IP changed to 10.1, the broadcast to 10.255, and we have 249 usable IPs. The range of IPs that DHCP is going to hand out is between 10.6 to 10.254. And I'm going to press apply changes. And now after doing an IP config space/release renew, I'm getting an IP of 192.168.10.87. So that's great. Before we move any further, I'm going to change this to dark mode as it's a little easier on my eyes. To do that, we go to system, and then we have two different themes. We have dark mode or we have light. So I'll click on dark mode, and then we'll press apply changes. Now to get our devices adopted into our controller, we need to go to the left-hand pane where it says Unified Devices. We can see it's pending adoption, and I'm going to press adopt device. We can now see that the USW Pro aggregation is getting ready. I need to do that for the other switches. All right, now all of our switches and our access points are adopted. There actually are two switches that aren't showing up, and this is my USW Flex. That's because I didn't do a reset them and they're still attached to my UDM Pro, but I will get to that eventually. This dashboard will tell us a couple things. We could see that the connection for all of these are wired. It will tell us the network that this gear is on, and then it will show the experience. Our UDM SE is at gigabit speed, and then our enterprise is 10 gigabit, same with our Pro aggregation. Our 16 PoE Lite is at gigabit. The next step we need to do is to create our networks. So we'll go to the settings wheel, and then we'll click on networks. We already have the default network created. We need to create the IoT, the camera, the guest, the access, VM, and VoIP. I'm just going to show you how to create one of these as the steps are the exact same for all of the networks. So let's go ahead and create our IoT network on VLAN 20. So to do this, we're going to create new network. We're going to give it a name, and I'll call it IoT. And then we need to specify the router. I'm going to be using my Mac Telecom SE. But if you have layer 3 switches, you could use that. Or we could just use this as a VLAN only network. I'm going to go ahead and turn off auto scale. And our host address is going to be 192.168.20.1. And that's going to update our gateway IP, our broadcast, and our IP range. So our IP range is 192.168.20.6 to 254. And now under advanced configuration, we're going to set this to manual. We're going to give it a VLAN ID of 20. And the network type is going to be a standard network. For our guest, we're going to want to specify that to be a guest network. When we choose guest network, it automatically creates firewall rules for us, so it will block inner VLAN routing. And then we could put on some content filtering if we'd like. You could either have none, work, or family. We could also turn on IGMP snooping and have multicast DNS on. So if you want to cast between your VLANs, you want to have this on, and it's on by default. We could also change some settings with DHCP, so the DHCP range or DHCP guarding. I'm going to leave everything else at default and press add network. So I'm going to go ahead and create those other networks, and then we'll hop over to creating Wi-Fi networks. All of our networks are now created. Let's create our Wi-Fi network. So we click on Wi-Fi, And then we're going to give this Wi-Fi an SSID name. So the first one will be Dolores. We need to give it a password of a minimum of 8 characters. And then we need to specify the network or VLAN that this Wi-Fi SSID is going to use. It's on default right now, but we want to change this over to IoT. And we have broadcasting APs. I'm going to let it broadcast on all of my access points. There's a bunch of different options below under advanced configurations, but I'm going to leave this at default and press add Wi-Fi network. Now we need to add the 3 other networks. So I'll create new Wi-Fi network. And looking back at our Wi-Fi SSIDs, we need to create Mac Telecom camera, give it a password, and then specify the VLAN that we want it to fall under. So this will be our camera network, and then press apply. Next up is our guest network. So we'll create new Wi-Fi network. We'll put in the SSID, and then we'll give it a password. We'll choose the network of guest, and then we'll press add Wi-Fi network. Now we're going to create our last network. This one is called Mac Telecom. I'll give it a password, and then I'm going to leave this under default and press apply. Our 4 Wi-Fi SSIDs are created, and under global AP settings, these are kind of new to the Unifi Network Controller 7.0.23. So we could do radio optimization, and if we hover over the eye icon, it says manually run a scan to optimize your AP channel settings. This will find the best channel and set it to that. We're going to manually select our channels. You could also set up a schedule for this optimization. We could have a channel list, AP exclusion, new device auto link, and then we have wireless meshing. So if you don't have any wireless meshing devices, you could turn this off and it will give you some more airtime and make your Wi-Fi a little bit better. I do have some meshing devices, so I will be leaving that on. We need to click on profiles. And then under bandwidth profile, we could either use the default or we could create a new bandwidth profile. I'll give this a name of guest. And then we're going to limit the download speed to 10 megabits per second down and 10 up. And we'll press apply changes. Now we need to apply this to a Wi-Fi network. So we would go to the Wi-Fi. We'll go to our guest network. And then under advanced configurations, I'm going to select manual. We would see here that we have a bandwidth profile. We could hit the drop-down menu and then select guest. So now this will make the guest network only be able to get 10 megabits per second down or 10 up. And this is per device. Now we have our networks created and our Wi-Fi networks created. What we need to do, we need to tag our switch ports to make them in the correct VLAN. To assign a VLAN to a switch port, we need to figure out which port it's on. So we could see my Mac Telecom UNVR. I'm going to click on it. And we could see here that it's uplinked to my USW Pro. And I know that the UNVR is on port 23, so I'm going to click on the port. And I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to call it UNVR Pro. And then we're going to put it into a port profile. And this is our VLANs. So if we scroll down, I'm going to put it into the camera VLAN and then press apply changes. So I also know on both my USW flexes that there's only cameras on those switches. So I'll click on the USW flex. And then on these 2 ports, we're going to put them into the camera network. So I'll click on port 3. I'll put it into the port profile of cameras and press apply changes. And to make that camera grab an IP quicker, I'm going to go back into the port and then I'm going to port power cycle. We need to do the same thing for port 5. We'll put that into my camera network and then we'll press apply changes. We'll go back to port 5 and then I'm going to port power cycle. So if I had a VoIP phone, I'm going to want to put it into my VoIP network. And you would follow the exact same steps that I just showed you for the cameras. Now my UNVR is in that new VLAN. We could see it's grabbed a new IP from that network. So 192.168.30.169. The next step we need to do, we need to create firewall rules. When we create new networks within our UDM SE, everything could talk to everything. That's just how Ubiquiti does it. So we're going to want to block inter VLAN routing. Right now, my IoT network could talk to my default network and it could talk to my camera network, and we don't want that. So we'll go down to the settings wheel and then we'll go over to firewall and security. The majority of the rules that we'll be creating will be done under LAN. So we could create a new rule and the type is going to be LAN in. The description I'm going to give for this rule is allow established and related. And there's a good documentation by Ubiquiti to understand firewall rules. I'll put it in the description below. So what the allow established and related means, the incoming packets are associated with an already existing connection. And then we have related. The incoming packets are new, but associated with an already existing connection. So we're going to accept this type of traffic. So under the action, we're going to say to accept. The protocols are going to be all. The only thing we're going to change is under advanced. We're going to click on manual and we're going to say match state established and match state related, and we'll press apply changes. The next rule is going to be to drop invalid state. So we'll create new rule. It's going to be done under LAN in and we'll call it drop invalid state. And this time the action is going to be to drop. And if we look back at that documentation, invalid means the incoming packets do not match any of the other states. We'll scroll down to advanced, we'll select manual, and then we'll do match state invalid, and then we'll press apply changes. Now looking under our firewall rules, if we go to LAN, we could see those two rules that are created. If we want to pause these firewall rules at any time, we could click the pause button on the left-hand side. The next thing we need to do, we need to create a group for all of our private IPv4 addresses. So at the bottom, we could see create new port or IP group. The name I'm going to give it is RFC 1918, and that's just request for comments 1918. It's a white paper. The type is going to be an IPv4 subnet. The first address will be 192.168.0.0/16. We're going to add another network, and it's going to be 172.16.0.0/12, and then we'll add one more, which will be 10.0.0.0/8. And then we'll press apply changes. Now going back to our firewall rules, we're going to create a new rule. The type is going to be LAN in, and it's going to be to allow our default network access to everything. We want that network to be able to talk to all the other networks. So we'll call it allow default to all VLANs. We're going to accept the traffic. The protocols will be all. The source is going to be a network, and that network is going to be our default. The destination is going to be a port/IP group, and it's going to be that new RFC 1918 group that we just created, and we'll press apply changes. Now this next rule is to block inter VLAN routing. So our IoT network can't talk to our default network, it can't talk to our guest network, and so on. So we'll create a new rule. We'll go to LAN in, and we'll call this block inter VLAN routing. The action will be to drop. The action will be to drop. The source will be a port IP group, and it will be RFC 1918. And then the same thing goes for our destination. We're just blocking private group to private group, and we'll press apply changes. Now say you wanted your guests to be able to access something like your NAS. Well, they wouldn't be able to because they're on different networks and it's blocking. But we could create an allow rule to do that. So we'll go to create new rule. We'll go to LAN in, and I'll say allow guest to NAS. The action will be to accept, and then our source type will be a network. The network will be our guest, and then the destination, I'm going to select an IP address. The IP address of my NAS would be 192.168.10.220, and we'll press apply changes. So here we could see that allow guest to NAS is below block inter VLAN routing, so it still wouldn't work. What we need to do, we need to grab this rule and drag and drop it above the block inter VLAN routing. That's because firewall rules are done in order from top down. Now, if we are on the IoT network, we would still be able to reach the gateways of all the other networks, so the .1s, and that would direct us to our UDM SE, so we need to block that out. So we're going to create a new port group, and I'm just going to do this for one network, but you would replicate this for every other network. The profile name I'll give it is block IoT to gateways. And we're going to put in all the IP addresses of the other gateways besides our own. So the first one will be 192.168.10.1. The second one will be 192.168.30.1. As the IoT network is 192.168.20.1. Then we'll put in 192.168.40.1. 192.168.50.1. And then the last one will be 192.168.70.1. And then we'll press apply changes. We're going to create a new rule, and all of our gateway rules are done under LAN local. So I'll call this the same thing, block IoT to gateways. The action will be to drop. The source will be a network of IoT, and then the destination will be that new group I created, block IoT to gateways, and we'll press apply changes. Since we can't block out our own gateway IP because we wouldn't be able to reach the internet, we need to block some ports. So HTTP, HTTPS, and SSH. So we're going to create a new port or IP group. I'll call this HTTP, HTTPS, and SSH. We're going to add port 80, 443, and 22. I also need to create a group with just my IP address. So I'll call this IoT gateway. And the gateway is 192.168.20.1. And then we'll apply changes. Now let's go back to our firewall rules and we'll create a new rule. It will be done under the LAN local. And I'll call this block IoT to UDM interface. The action will be to drop. The source is going to be a network of our IoT network. The destination will be a port IP group, and it will be IoT gateway, and then that new port group that we created. And we'll press apply changes. So that will be it for the firewall rules. There are more in-depth topics we could go about, but I need to make a full separate video about that. Now let's go over a couple other things to secure your Ubiquiti network. And the first main thing you should have on everything is two-factor authentication. And where we go to enable that is account.ui.com. When we're in account.ui.com, we want to go over to security, and then we have multi-factor authentication. We're going to want to enable this. So there's a couple different types of MFA. We could do app authentication, email authentication, UI verify, and SMS are coming soon. So we're going to do it by app authentication. Here it's going to bring up a QR code. You need to use something like Authy or Google Authenticator and scan the QR code. Once you scan the QR code, it's going to ask you to put in the 6-digit authentication code. And now that we've done that, we could see that our multi-factor authentication is turned on. We could look under the other methods and we could see that it's also turned on email authentication. Next, let's take a look at threat management. So we could either have it off, we could have it detect only, or we could have it detect and block, and that's what I'm going to do. It says enable threat management may reduce maximum throughput speeds. I'm going to turn the sensitivity to high, so that will enable all of these threat categories. If you want to edit threat categories, we could click on the pencil icon, and we could turn on or off any of these switches. If we scroll down, we could also turn on honeypots. So we have internal honeypots, and I'm going to enable them. I'm going to enable each of the honeypots for every one of my networks. So for my default, it will be on 192.168.10.2. Make sure you haven't statically assigned any device to the .2 network. So we'll create another honeypot, which will be IoT. This will be camera. We'll do guest, Unifi access, VM, and then VoIP. And then we're going to apply the changes. Another thing we could do, we could block or allow different countries. I'm going to block a country, and we could do it in both directions. From here, we could pick any country. You could pick Canada, US, Russia, China. I'll choose Russia, China, and then North Korea. And then we'll apply the changes. Now, if we take a look on the left-hand side, we have this traffic inspector. What this will do, it will show all of our clients and then events from 10 a.m., 11 a.m., and so on and so forth. It will show us if we have any threat severity, so known, unknown, concerning, or blocked. We could also take a look at our threat map. This is a brand new UDM SE and we have no threats, but we could see that we have a few blocked countries by the lines going through the countries. Another thing, to lock down my Mac Telecom Wi-Fi network, I'm going to click on that Wi-Fi network, and then I'm going to do MAC address filter, and we're going to enable it. We're going to put my phone's MAC address in the allow list. For now, I'll just use a fake MAC address, 1122334455 and 66, and then we'll press apply changes. So now the only thing that could connect to that Wi-Fi network is the MAC address of that phone or whatever device you have on it. Now let's take a look at optimizing our access points. So my U6 Lite and my U6 Pro are both upstairs. So I'm going to click on the U6 Lite. I'm going to go to settings, and then we'll see the radios. So for the channel width of the 2.4, I'm going to always leave it at 20, but we're going to manually select the channels. So the non-overlapping channels in the 2.4 gigahertz are 1, 6, and 11. So I have 2 access points upstairs. So I'll set 1 to channel 1, 1 to channel 6. On my main floor, I'll put that on channel 11. And then in the basement, I'll put that back on channel 1. So we'll select channel 1. I'm going to leave the transmit power the same. And for our 5 gigahertz radio, we're going to put this to 80. I'll scroll down and then we'll press apply changes. Now for my U6 Pro, we're going to go to settings. And then we're going to select that channel to be on channel 6. For the 5 gigahertz radio, we'll put it on 80, and we'll do a channel selection for this as well. We'll put this one on 149, and we'll press apply changes. I need to go back to my U6 Lite because I didn't set the 5 gigahertz. We'll go to settings, and the channel selection for this I'll put on 48, and we'll press apply changes. Now for my main floor access point, we'll press settings, and I'll put the channel on channel 11. For the 5 gigahertz, we're going to want to select a different channel. So we'll put this on 153, and then we'll press apply changes. Now, since we only have those 3 non-overlapping channels, for my U6LR that's in the basement, I'm going to set this back on channel 1. Since they're far enough apart, they shouldn't be overlapping. And then for the 5 gigahertz, I'm going to set this to channel 157, and then we'll apply the changes. Another thing to optimize your Wi-Fi, if you don't need any meshing, you could turn off enable meshing on all the APs. We could also go to the settings wheel, and then under wireless meshing, we could turn that off. Now let's take a look at some of the new things on the UDM SE. So let's click on the UDM SE, and we could see under the 8 ports that I have 2 ports plugged in, and they're currently getting PoE+. And these are 2 G4 bullet cameras. So we could see that the PoE is working on the SE. The other new feature is the 2.5 gigabit WAN interface, which we won't be able to test because I only have that 1 gigabit interface. But let's look at the Protect controller as we get 128 gigabit SSD. Now we're into Unifi Protect on the UDM SE. We could see that there was 1 event done in the top, and there's 2 cameras adopted into this controller. We could see our storage utilization, and it has 128 gigabits and 2 cameras that are on 1080p. Let's go to the devices. We could see a bunch of devices that are managed by other. That's because they're on my UNVR Pro. But let's click on one of these G4 bullets. What we really want to look at here is how it records to the UDM SE. So we'll go over to recording. And the only option we have for the UDM SE is based on detections or never. So this won't do 24/7 recording. It only does detections, and that's it. So if you wanted 24/7 recording, you'd have to put a hard drive into the UDM SE. So that's going to be it for this video. I know it was a lot to go over. And the main question is, would I recommend the UDM SE over the UDM Pro? And I probably would. And the reason for that, a lot more companies are going to be getting higher than gigabit speeds in the future. So this will future-proof us. Although it shares a 1 gigabit backplane, we could still put low bandwidth devices on it like IP phones. If you have any questions about this video, leave a comment below. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up button. If you're new here, please subscribe and hit the bell icon. All right, thanks.